The Battle of Monmouth, fought on June 28, 1778, in present-day Freehold Borough, New Jersey, was a significant engagement during the American Revolutionary War. This battle marked the last major confrontation in the Northern Theater and showcased the improved capabilities of the Continental Army under General George Washington. Hi there, I'm Kyle, the host of History of Human Evolution, with a PhD in history and a love for storytelling. I'm here to guide you through the fascinating journey of our species. If you like to explore the past, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts below. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, the Continental Army found itself encamped at Valley Forge, enduring one of the most punishing periods of the American Revolutionary War. Deprived of adequate supplies, suffering from exposure, and weakened by disease, Washington's forces teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet amidst the hardship, a transformation was underway. The arrival of Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, a Prussian officer with experience in European warfare, introduced a rigorous training regimen that reshaped the army. Drills, discipline, and a standardized approach to battlefield maneuvering took root, forging an army capable of standing against the well-trained British regulars. By the spring of 1778, the balance of power had begun to shift. In February, France formally entered the war as an ally of the American cause, recognizing the fledgling republic and promising military and naval support. This development forced the British to reconsider their strategic position. Philadelphia, occupied since the previous autumn, no longer held the same value. Its defense required resources that could be better concentrated elsewhere, particularly in New York City, where the Royal Navy could provide stronger protection. In May, orders arrived from London. General Sir Henry Clinton, now in command following the resignation of General William Howe, was instructed to evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate British forces in New York. A direct maritime withdrawal, however, was not an option. The French Navy threatened the Atlantic coast, making a sea evacuation too risky. Instead, Clinton would have to march his army overland across New Jersey, a slow and vulnerable movement that stretched the British column across nearly 12 miles. The British force departing Philadelphia numbered approximately 11,000 men, including Hessian auxiliaries, Loyalist contingents, and a cumbersome baggage train. Accompanying them were civilians, camp followers, merchants, and families of officers, adding to the logistical challenge. As the column moved northward, the summer heat bore down, exacerbating the already arduous conditions. The march was methodical, but it was also exposed. Washington, aware of the British vulnerability, saw an opportunity. From his headquarters, the American commander convened a council of war. His generals debated the wisdom of attacking a larger and more experienced force, particularly one that still retained formidable discipline. Charles Lee, recently exchanged after his capture at the Battle of Fort Sullivan, expressed skepticism, arguing that an engagement risked a repeat of earlier disasters. Others, including the Marquis de Lafayette and General Nathanael Greene, advocated for a strike, believing the time had come to test the Continental Army's newfound cohesion. Washington made his decision. The Americans would not allow the British to retreat unchallenged. Instead, a force would be dispatched to harass their rear, disrupt their march, and if conditions allowed, deliver a significant blow. The campaign in New Jersey was far from over. Washington had made his decision. The British retreat from Philadelphia would not go unchallenged. By late June 1778, Clinton's army was stretched across the New Jersey countryside, marching in the stifling heat towards Sandy Hook. The cumbersome baggage train slowed the pace, and the British, though still formidable, were vulnerable to harassment. The opportunity was clear. If the Continental Army could press the retreating force, it might inflict enough damage to change the course of the war in the north. The task of leading the advance fell to Major General Charles Lee. Recently returned to American command after a lengthy imprisonment by the British, Lee was an experienced officer but deeply skeptical of Washington's plan. He had little confidence in the ability of the Continental Army to stand against British regulars in open battle, and he resisted the idea of a large-scale engagement. Washington, however, insisted on a decisive demonstration of strength. Lee's force, numbering around 5,000 men, moved ahead to intercept the British rear guard, commanded by Lord Cornwallis. But from the start, the American deployment suffered from confusion. Lee hesitated to commit fully, issuing vague orders that left his officers uncertain. His objective remained unclear. Was this to be a delaying action, a reconnaissance in force, or a full-scale attack? His indecision spread through the ranks, weakening the offensive before it had even begun. On the morning of June 28th, as American troops approached Monmouth Courthouse, British forces prepared to meet them. Cornwallis, a veteran of European campaigns, quickly recognized the disorder in the American ranks and seized the moment to counterattack. Instead of a retreating enemy, Lee's men found themselves under sudden and aggressive pressure. The Continental formations faltered. Uncertain of the situation, Lee issued contradictory orders, first pressing forward, then calling for a withdrawal. What began as a planned offensive now risked turning into a rout. American forces fell back in disorder, pursued by British troops pressing the advantage. The attack had failed, and Lee had lost control of his men. News of the retreat reached Washington, who was riding ahead with the main army. He spurred his horse forward, racing toward the battlefield. The moment he arrived, he saw it for himself. Lee's force in retreat, soldiers abandoning their positions, confusion spreading through the lines. Washington had no time for hesitation. He had to take command. Washington reached the battlefield in a fury. His officers had never seen him so enraged. As Charles Lee's troops retreated in confusion, the commander-in-chief rode straight toward him, demanding an explanation for the collapse of the attack. Lee stammered, attempting to justify the withdrawal, but Washington had no time for arguments. The British, led by Cornwallis, were pressing forward. If the retreat continued, the entire American advance force would be shattered. Washington immediately took control. He ordered Lee to organize a defensive stand to buy time while he repositioned the main Continental Army. Along the road leading back to Monmouth Courthouse, he deployed troops under Generals Nathaniel Greene and Anthony Wayne. Artillery under Colonel Henry Knox was rushed into position, forming a strong defensive line on elevated ground. These orders were carried out swiftly, and the retreating American soldiers, seeing Washington in command, steadied themselves. Cornwallis, seeing the disorder in the American ranks, pushed his troops forward, hoping to crush Washington's army before it could reorganize. But as the British advanced, they encountered stiff resistance. The Continental artillery, now fully engaged, unleashed a withering barrage that stalled the assault. Lee's remaining forces, holding their ground, bought Washington enough time to complete his realignment. With the main army now in position, Washington ordered a counterattack. Wayne led his troops against the British center, while Greene's forces positioned themselves on the right flank, establishing an artillery position on Combs Hill. From this elevated ground, the Continental cannons rained fire upon the British ranks, disrupting their movements and inflicting heavy casualties. Washington, ever aware of the battlefield's shifting conditions, moved among his troops, directing fire and urging his men to hold their lines. The heat of the day became another enemy. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and both sides suffered from exhaustion and dehydration. Soldiers collapsed from heat stroke, and gunpowder fouled in the humidity. Amid the chaos, one of the most enduring figures of the battle emerged, Mary Ludwig Hayes, later known as Molly Pitcher. As her husband fell at his cannon, she took his place, swabbing and loading the gun under relentless British fire. For hours, the two armies fought in brutal close combat. The British launched repeated assaults, but Washington's lines held firm. By late afternoon, the momentum had shifted. Cornwallis, recognizing that the American position was too strong to break, ordered his forces to pull back. As the sun set, the battlefield fell silent. Though the British technically retained the field, they had been forced to withdraw under pressure. That night, Clinton's army slipped away, continuing its march toward New York. Washington, refusing to risk a night assault, held his position, ensuring that his forces remained organized and ready for whatever came next. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the dead and dying. Soldiers from both sides collapsed from exhaustion, dehydration, and wounds. The sweltering heat had taken its toll. More men perished from heat stroke than from musket fire. As darkness settled over Monmouth Courthouse, Clinton knew his army could not sustain another day of combat. Under the cover of night, the British quietly withdrew, slipping away towards Sandy Hook. By morning, Washington's troops found the field abandoned. Despite the British withdrawal, Monmouth was not a clear-cut victory. The Continental Army had not destroyed Clinton's force, nor had it prevented the British from continuing their march to New York. But the battle had proven something far more significant. The army that had suffered through the winter at Valley Forge was no longer a ragged, disorganized militia. It had stood toe-to-toe with one of the most experienced armies in the world and held the field. Washington's leadership on that day silenced many of his critics. His ability to stabilize the battlefield, reform his lines, and hold his ground demonstrated the effectiveness of the training instilled by Baron von Steuben. It was no longer the same army that had suffered humiliating defeats in New York 2 years earlier. Monmouth was a test of discipline, endurance, and command. For Charles Lee, the consequences were immediate. Furious over his failure, Washington had him arrested and court-martialed for his conduct during the battle. Charged with disobedience and poor leadership, Lee was found guilty and suspended from command for a year. He would never return to a position of influence. His military career effectively ended by his failure at Monmouth. For the British, Monmouth marked the last major engagement in the northern theater of the war. Clinton's forces completed their retreat to New York, where they would remain entrenched for the rest of the conflict. The war's focus shifted south, where British strategy now aimed to break American resistance through campaigns in Georgia and the Carolinas. Yet for the Continental Army, Monmouth was a defining moment. It was not the crushing victory Washington had hoped for, but it was a demonstration of resilience. The army had faced British regulars in open battle and had not broken. The war would continue, but from that day forward, Washington's troops knew they could stand against the British, not as scattered militias, but as a disciplined, unified force. The Battle of Monmouth left a lasting imprint on the American War of Independence. Though tactically inconclusive, its strategic significance was undeniable. It was the last major engagement in the Northern Theater, marking the end of large-scale combat between Washington's army and British forces in that region. After Monmouth, the war's center of gravity shifted south, where the British sought to regain control through their campaigns in Georgia and the Carolinas. For the Continental Army, Monmouth became a symbol of progress. The disciplined formations that had held their ground against British regulars reflected the success of von Steuben's training at Valley Forge. No longer an army of militia units prone to scattering under fire, Washington soldiers had proven their ability to fight a sustained engagement against one of the most professional forces in the world. This transformation bolstered morale and solidified Washington's leadership, silencing many who had doubted his command ability after the early defeats in New York. The battle also played a role in shaping military memory and American mythology. The story of Molly Pitcher, the woman who allegedly took her husband's place at a cannon, became a powerful legend, embodying the contributions of women to the war effort. Though historians debate the details of her story, whether she was a single historical figure or a composite of multiple women, her name became enshrined in revolutionary folklore, reinforcing the image of ordinary Americans stepping forward in moments of crisis. Monmouth's legacy extends beyond its immediate impact. The battlefield itself, preserved as Monmouth Battlefield State Park, remains a site of historical study and remembrance. The engagement highlighted the importance of endurance, command under pressure, and the evolution of military tactics in the Revolution. More than just a clash of armies, Monmouth represented the maturation of the American war effort, an indication that the struggle for independence was no longer just a rebellion, but a full-scale war fought by an army capable of standing on equal footing with its adversary. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.